Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update for the 13th of January 2024. Sorry I'm a little bit late. One of my boys, one of my twins was playing a cup game, a football match. They lost 2-0. Oh, it's so frustrating. We had 90% of possession. Our team had no substitutes. 5 were off today. We had one with a broken leg. All our strikers were off, and so we lost 2-0, and we should have easily won that game. It's one of those really frustrating games where you're peppering the goal, and it just doesn't go in. So anyway, out of the cup. Nonetheless, Finn played really well. So one of the dads came up and said he was a beast today. Best game he's ever had. Yeah, I'll take that. Proud dad moment. Anyway, whatever. Russian losses, as according to the Ukrainian General Staff, these are the figures that you need to take with a pinch of salt. All the caveats are in the description to the video below. 700 personnel lost is fairly high, but not as high as we have seen. 5 tanks, 15 APVs, and 18 artillery systems. Little tick up there for artillery. APVs, fairly, I guess, average losses, but still quite significant. 15 to losing their own 5 tanks. Now, weather's going to have a big say in what's going on. You have the challenges to the weather, which is perishingly cold. I mean, really cold. So the troops don't want to move. They don't want to go and start attacking and getting involved in doing war. You just want to sit next to your stove in a dugout if you can. If you've got one, if you don't have one, then you're in trouble. So it's really challenging conditions for just the sheer temperature for the personnel. Then you have the challenges for drones. So it's cold, they develop ice on them, but also if there's snow, low cloud, wind, all that kind of stuff, then use of drones is going to drop, which means the use of maneuvers, the eyes in the sky are not active, so doing maneuvers becomes more difficult, and also artillery spotting is more difficult. FPV drones are less prevalent, so those challenges, and then you have snow drifts if there are heavy snows. So a real challenge when it's this cold and snowy. I guess the pros for that are that the ground is harder generally, and where the autumn and indeed spring periods you have respititsa or the bezdorizhia, or whatever the Ukrainian word for it is, the heavy muds, that sort of freezes, ground freezes over. It becomes actually easier to move vehicles if you don't have snowdrifts. So there are some pros and cons, but in general, it's going to be more challenging in this kind of weather condition. Right, 4 anti-aircraft warfare systems is over double the average. That's a really good day for the Ukrainians in that respect. 20 vehicles and fuel tanks is, I guess, in the middle somewhere, and 6 pieces of special equipment, fairly high for that category. So, yeah, a bit of a mixed bag of nuts, and the sort of day that's still going to be challenging for the Russians, even though it is lower in some categories. And this is the sort of day for equipment lost that the Ukrainians are going to absolutely love. So there's only 2 bits of kit that Andrew Perpetua's found on his surveillance of the social media platforms that he looks at to try and do his mapping. Only 2 lost, and I guess, well, I don't know, 2 for, I don't know, it's going to be something like 12-1 or something like that. It's a very good day for the Ukrainians. They lose a boat and a BTR. The Russians lose an RB-109A, and I'll show you that in a second. I don't know the cost of that. It's an electronic warfare system, and it's a very new system, but there's very little data on it because it's so new. But I'm fairly sure that'd be a high-value piece of equipment. Then some comms equipment, a couple of bits of artillery, a T-90M tank there destroyed, ganked by Bradleys, and I'll show you that, or at least I'll reference that video. It's an extraordinary video. T-80, T-72, some IFVs and some armoured personnel carriers, the MTLB, and then a lot of trucks and civilian vehicles too. So all in, that's a much worse day for the Russians than the Ukrainians. Although, you know, T-90 and the RB-109 are the main value systems there. The rest are just a lot of kit. Painful for the Russians. Right, Anton Gerashchenko says that Russia has lost, according to Forbes, so there's a new Forbes article out. According to the Forbes article, Russia's lost almost 90% of its tanks in Ukraine since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Forbes sources have information that the Russian army entered the war with 2,987 tanks. For 23 months of intense combat, the Russians have lost at least 2,619 tanks. A figure confirmed by independent analysts. This includes 1,725 destroyed, 145 damaged, 205 abandoned, 544 captured tanks of T-55, 62, 72, 80 and 90 models. Quote, if the Kremlin didn't have options for replacing war losses, the Russian military would be down to just 368 tanks, far too few to defend against Ukraine's own armored corps, which between pre-war tanks, restored tanks and donated tanks minus losses might number around 1,000 vehicles, Forbes has stated. So far, the Kremlin has sources of tank replacements. These are the Ural Vagonzavod plant, which manufactures new T-90Ms, those are breakthrough tanks, as well as 4 enterprises that repair old tanks. Their production capacities are unknown. The Kremlin claims that as a result of intensive industrial efforts, the Russian army has received 1,500 new and modernized tanks. However, Forbes analysts question these claims, and people like Covert Cabal on YouTube, well worth following, do analyses of these fields of tanks and artillery pieces that have been left, rusting away for decades, and see them change over the course of the war to suggest that a certain number of those will be replaced, will be used to be cannibalized so that they can replace those lost tanks. But again, it's very difficult to give a firm number for the replacements and for the capacity, the manufacturing capacity of the Russians at present time. If that's true, then the Russian armed forces might be down to just 1,180 tanks, says Gerashchenko, perhaps slightly more tanks than the Ukrainian armed forces currently possess. After all, it's not for nothing that the Russians remove monument tanks from their pedestals and send rusty junk to the front. And moving on, this is the footage that Andrew Perpetua is referring to. This is a cut down and sped up 2 minutes 29 bit of footage. It is so worth checking this footage out. All the links are in the description below for the first 2 sections here. So what this footage shows is a Bradley. You can see the Bradley here, and there is a T-90M, so the most modern Russian tank, up here, up this kind of lane, if you like, this gap between 2 sort of tree lines there. So up there is a Russian tank, and the Bradley sort of hangs around down the end here, going backs and forwards, getting into cover, coming out and shooting, getting back into cover. It's a bit like being a tank destroyer in the world of tanks. You can see some cluster munitions being dropped there. It comes back and then takes on, there it is. So takes on this this T-90 tank and basically hammers it. It comes back, reverses out, goes up, comes back, goes across here, and just absolutely strafes with all these high explosive rounds into, and unfortunately I can't show you it close, but you can go and watch it, and I think you should. So the Bradley IFE says Special Kherson Cat of the 47th Brigade of Ukraine engages in the battle with the Russian T-90M on the Avdiivka front. Bradley is in the foreground while the T-90M is in the middle of the village. At the end of the video, it's visible that the tank most likely received significant damage as the crew cannot control the turret rotation. It's sped up 5 times. So at the end, the turret... So I'm interested that Andrew says it's destroyed, because it actually drives off, and I'm like, the Bradley could have really finished it off, because the turret is just rotating like that. It's going round and round. Anyway, Andrew Perpetua says about this, Jeezy Creasy, a Russian T-90M couldn't even hold its own in a one-to-one combat with the Bradley when it had the first shot. So the Bradley got the first shot off. Now, a good fire control system and good optics on modern tanks means that you get the first shot and that's all you need. You shouldn't be missing on that first shot, because if you miss, then it gives them the opportunity to hit you. So modern tanks are pretty good at getting that shot off and blowing the enemy up. So that the T-90M didn't get that first shot successful. It wasn't successful in the first shot. Is, I think, quite revealing, and it knew that Bradley was there. So this tank got effing ganked. Russian tech and trainings, such an shite show that they can't even win a tank versus IFV 1v1 when it gets the first shot in advance. And then he carries on. He's quite animated, Andrew, about this, and lots of people are. Imagine losing this hard. This footage is very edited. It's over 8 minutes uncut, but most of the uncut stuff is Bradley composing itself between absolute ass kickings. Full video is linked in the thread below, so all these videos are linked for you. It's just absolutely hammering with an awful lot. As you can see there, all those flashes, the high explosive rounds of the Bradley just hammering into the in and around the T90M. So that's a pretty staggering bit of footage. Strike on, as said, a Russian RB-109A Bylina EW system. Video by the Shadow Unit. Bylina entered service with the Russian Armed Forces in 2018. And this happened near, actually, Donetsk and on the Avdiivka front again. So this is possibly a very high value target. I'm trying to find out about the RB-109A here, and it's quite difficult because it's relatively new. Just trying to find out the cost. As you can see, when you put that into Bing, I know normally use Google, but I'm on Bing it's the browser of choice when I'm doing like updates like this, because if I use Mapped, it uses less computing power, oddly, compared to Microsoft Edge, compared to Google. So just the default search is Bing, and it's not as good as Google in my opinion, obviously, but it does have this thing where it does AI searches, and it's quite useful. So here I put in, what's the cost of the RB-109A Bylina? It says, I assume you're asking the cost of the RB-109A Bylina electronic warfare system. I found some information on this topic. However, I could not find any reliable source that provides a cost of the system, which is great because it stops me looking at like 50 different articles and finding that there's no cost associated with it. The AI at the moment is helping out searches quite a lot. The RB-109A is a sophisticated electronic warfare system developed by Russia to detect and counter enemy radio-emitting weapons. It is part of the Bylina project, which is expected to be delivered to the Russian military by 2025. Of course, I don't know if that will still be the case. So it's designed to detect active enemy radio-emitting weapons both in the front line and in deep rear areas at distances of up to 800 kilometers, depending on the radio horizon and the height of the RTR modules. I hope this information helps. It does. That's really actually very useful. Thank you, AI, for Bing there. That gives you a sense of what that does, and I would guess, as I said earlier, that it is a high value bit of kit, and the Russians would not appreciate losing that. Right. Lots to say on Russia on fire, and people are saying that there is certainly an uptick of fires happening. This is downtown Moscow, a restaurant called True Cost in Bolshaya Dimitrovka, and that's a light. 50 people had to evacuate and so on and so forth. So that's in the center of Moscow. Okay, so what? Now this one is behemoth. I don't think I've ever seen such a big fire on an establishment. The Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations reports that the area of the fire in the Wild Berries warehouse complex in St. Petersburg has grown to 50,000 square meters. Lots of fires appearing lately, and that's really what I wanted to kind of communicate as well. That other people are noticing that these fires are popping up quite a lot in Russia at the moment. We know that Ukrainian intelligence has been paying people in Russia. There is that claim that has been going around that money does a lot of work for the Ukrainian intelligence. And I mean, just see that fire. St. Petersburg, are you okay? Someone is just some insane footage coming out. Just incredible. The fire is absolutely massive. Should be seen from space. I mean, when you look at that as a bit of footage, you understand how significant that this fire really is. It is huge. So anyway. It caused quite a bit of damage. Massive fire at the warehouse of Wild Berries Company. Now, there was some rumors coming out here that actually they've had some issues there, that there was an immigrant worker was stabbed, I think, and then they might have been rounding immigrants up for like the war effort as well at places at Wild Berries. I'm not sure, but there are some rumors coming out this is just a big old fire going on. Anton Gerashenko gives a bit of analysis here. Wildberry's company claims it's negotiating with the rescue services to use a helicopter to put the fire out at the warehouse in St. Petersburg. So if there's a fire in Russia and the smoke from it covers half of St. Petersburg, negotiations with fire persons are needed, so they will start work. If someone gets robbed in Russia, should the person start negotiating with the police? This is complete breakdown of the system if connections are needed, even for issues like this one. There have been at least 50 large fires in the past 5 to 6 months in the large warehouses in Russia, mostly in the Moscow region and St. Petersburg. No one's been punished. There have been rumors that with these sanctions, it is more profitable to burn down the building and get payments from insurance and upkeep half-empty spaces. Something I've mentioned a number of times. And then finally, a building under construction in Moscow is burnt down. Sberbank, or at least is on fire. Sberbank building, which is currently under construction in Moscow, is burning. So many strange fires lately, again, says Noel reports. Yeah, this is a real big challenge, I think, for Russia. I wonder if you added together all the losses in terms of loss to the structure, the rebuilding costs, the insurance costs, the opportunity cost of not having those structures open in terms of supply lines and commercial activity and so on and so forth. I wonder what the total loss to Russia would be over the course of the whole war for these large fires that otherwise wouldn't have happened if the war wasn't taking place. So if you look at the anomalous statistics, and people have done that, and I've shared some of that with you, there are many more fires and bigger fires and fires in particular places that weren't happening previously, or at least not to the scale that is the case now. And yeah, how much is that costing Russia? Right, air defense forces. So moving on to strikes, distance munitions. It was a pretty challenging night last night in terms of the kind of missiles that were sent into Ukraine. So here we see 0 out of 3 Shaheeds were shot down, 0 out of 13 ballistic missiles. I think that's S-300 and S-400. 0 out of 6 Kinzhal, the hypersonic missiles. 0 out of 6 KH-22 and 32, and 1 out of 6 KH-59, 31P. So those semi-ballistic and anti-ship, I think, missiles of those varieties just not being shot down. So in total, air defense has shot down 7 out of 12 X-101 cruise missiles. So the basic cruise missiles are easier to hit, and you can see the interception rate is better. But this is part of the Ukrainian narrative, and I don't know how true this is. This could be a bit of PR, but it could also be true. So more than 20 of the missiles did not reach their goals as a result of active countermeasures by electronic warfare means. Now, we heard last time there was a fairly successful missile attack on Ukraine that they did claim that a number of them did not reach their targets. So this is a recurring thing. But, you know, goodness me, that's what, 16, 22, 28... 33 plus the 5 there, so that's 38 missiles that were not shot down. Okay, assuming the Ukrainians are correct in what they say, more than 20 missiles, let's just say 20 missiles, that's 18 missiles that found their targets. That's 18 significant missiles or Shaheeds that managed to hit Ukrainian targets. That will hurt. Last night will have hurt Ukraine. Even if we don't hear about it and the footage doesn't come out, it is going to be a challenge for the Ukrainians. Russia targets regions across Ukraine in a mass missile attack, says the Kiev Independent. Russia carried out a mass attack against regions across Ukraine on the morning of January the 13th using a range of weapons, including hypersonic missiles, according to local authorities. Russian MOD claims high-precision strikes, including with Kinzhal missiles, today hit, quote, military-industrial complexes in Ukraine, producing 155, 152 and 125 mil gunpowder and unmanned aerial vehicles. So the Russians are claiming that they have successfully hit the Ukrainian military-industrial complex that is predominantly making artillery ammunition as well as gunpowder and unmanned aerial vehicles, drones. Now, I would suggest that that's going to at least be partially true. And we know that the Ukrainians have had their industrial military complex hit already recently. It looks like the Russians are concentrating on that rather than the energy infrastructure. And I've said previously that's probably a good decision. If the war is going to go on for several years, then Russia really need to be hitting the Ukrainian indigenous manufacturing capability, because they are starting to produce weapons and at scale that are helping the Ukrainians on the battlefront. The Russians then added that all designated objects were hit. So although there's no proof of that, right? But the Russians are claiming everything hit. The Ukrainians are claiming they shot down some, particularly cruise missiles, and that indeed that electronic warfare was effective as well. Now, we can add on to this claim. So, quote, Russia is striking Ukraine's airfields because it fears the arrival of F-16 fighter jets into service with the armed forces, according to the head of Estonian intelligence. So the Estonians do produce quite a few nuggets here and there. Their intelligence appears to be fairly active concerning the Ukraine war. But again, take that with a pinch of salt. It would be amazing if they weren't striking the Ukrainian airfields. We know that they've been going for Khmelnytsky's Starokonstantinov air base. So, yeah, that's of no surprise at all. Quote, Russian missiles are increasingly deteriorating and going astray. So this goes back to the Ukrainian narrative. And I don't know what to think of claims like this without evidence. So, I'm kind of thinking it might possibly be true. It seems plausible, but I'll hang back from definitely saying that this is the case. Ukrainian air forces, in the aftermath of the Russian morning missile attack, made that claim. 8 out of 40 missiles were destroyed, but more than 20 did not reach their targets due to counteraction by Ukrainian electronic warfare. Are they deteriorating their missiles? I mean, they appear to be using the newer missiles. Are they being constructed more poorly at the moment? Who knows? I don't know. But anyway, that's what the Ukrainians are claiming. On the other hand, explosions have been reported in Mariupol. Air defense is reportedly active. So that's Mariupol, as well as a number of air defense, number of pieces of evidence of air defense activity around Makivka and Donetsk. So the Donetsk region is under threat from the Ukrainians. Trying to hit the Russian targets there. A drone fell on a gas station, a petrol station in Volgograd, around 400 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, which is kind of odd. Be odd that it'd be going for just a petrol station. So either it wasn't going for that petrol station and it fell out the sky because of electronic warfare, or it malfunctioned. Some locals are saying that it may have been a radio-controlled model plane. A service station in Krasnukhi-Tiabursky district has been sealed off by the police. So that happened. And then residents in 4 villages in Belgorod lost power today after drones allegedly struck the region. Russia says the shutdown hit Glotovo, Benzimino, partially Podol, and Kozinka. In Belgorod, a few cars were also damaged in Kozinka. There were no casualties. And then we have the news that during a morning Russian missile attack on Ukraine, Poland raised planes into the air. Reported the operational director of the Armed Forces of Poland, quote, there is an increased activity of long-range aviation of the Russian Federation, which is connected with the intentions of strikes on the territory of Ukraine. All the necessary procedures to ensure the safety of Polish airspace have been initiated. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces now. Hackers in Ukraine claim they've leaked 200 gigabytes of private data from 3,000 companies in Russia. This is obviously to the benefit of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainian hackers have been very active over the last few weeks, being pretty successful in disrupting activities within Russia. So the quote here is, representative of the IT army leaked the data of 3,000 companies of the aggressor countries. The IT Army of Ukraine plans to share weekly reports on open data of the aggressor country. This will help to track the supporters of the war and prepare evidence against them for the future international courts. And it's asking people to join the ranks of the IT Army, so you can get involved if you are that way inclined and would have those skills. Right, 2 Siberian airlines have asked the government to extend the service life of a 50-year-old AN-24 and 26 planes because there is nothing to replace them due to Western sanctions, according to Sergei Zorin, the general director of Angara Airlines. There is no replacement for them. Alexei Evseev, acting technical director of Polar Airlines, said AN-24 and 26 have been and remain the only means of passenger and cargo transportation in Yakutia. He stressed at the same time, he said, over the past 2 years, everyone who's used these airplanes has encountered problems with spare parts and engine components. Quote, this needs to be fixed, Evseev said. So still issues for the aviation, civil aviation in Russia. Sorry, I think I had this stat was right on my frontline update yesterday, but I meant to have it for today here. So a Chechen fighter talks about the state of affairs at the front. He says they are starving, drinking the water from puddles, and suffering huge losses. There are multiple casualties that can be seen in this video. He also says they are simply sitting in dugouts and are afraid to stick their heads out. As I said yesterday, some of those claims can probably apply to the Ukrainians as well, arguably, although they will have better access to logistics because it's their own country, and so I think things like food and water would be easier to come by, but conditions are going to be tough for the Ukrainians too as well, obviously. But here is just another bit of evidence to add to the picture of what is going on the front lines. It is tough out there, and the Russians are feeling it. That Chechen soldier confirming that. Now, in Chelyabinsk in Russia, today on one of the streets there, a public heating point was set up. Jokes aside, another pipeline broke, lots of steam rises, and there are still no utility employees anywhere. In other words, the public heating is the heating breaking down and people get nearby being able to heat themselves because they can't heat themselves in their apartments because it's all going wrong. Anyway, the point is that this is still happening. Hashtag Russia is freezing is now a hashtag. And indeed, there was another example of that as well that I haven't got for some reason. But there is another bit of footage to suggest that there is another city as well that's suffering with that. I just can't remember what it was. Anyway, Zelensky said yesterday, Russia must not be given the opportunity to prepare for a major counteroffensive. Russia must not be given the opportunity to develop manufacturing. If war is frozen, Russia will have time to prepare for a revenge war. This must not happen, Zelensky told Latvian journalists. And that's the importance of having an active defense over this winter and spring period. They can't just sit back and reconstitute. They need to reconstitute what's also causing the Russians enough issues so that they can't themselves reconstitute. They need to be hitting the Russian manufacturing facilities. They need to be hitting the Russian logistics, and so on and so forth. So expect, with the help of allied nations and weapons from them, hopefully, expect the Ukrainians to continue to hit important Russian targets, as well as would expect the Ukrainians to be building at scale drones to be able to strike into Russia at a distance. And this is why the Russians last night would have been trying to hit those drone manufacturing facilities themselves. They realized that you know, it's rather like the Ukrainians realise they've got to strike at the airfields that are and at the manufacturing facilities that are producing the Shaheeds or the missiles or whatever, but they also need to hit the airfields where those missiles and Shaheeds are sent from. Well, in the same way, Russia are realising they need to take out the facilities that the Ukrainians are using to manufacture weapons for their own usage. So yeah, both sides will be trying the same thing. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'm going to grab a bite to eat and then get back to you with the second video.